Though obscured, their focus is locked on that vehicle. It is chillingly evident they are desperately concealing their actions from prying eyes. Whatever dark secret unfolds, tonight's events brim with unsettling intrigue. Federal investigators and local deputies were seen treating that precise automobile as a critical focal point. At exactly 2:36 in the morning, a lone vehicle glided silently past a security lens near Nancy Guthrie's quiet subdivision. Moments prior, authorities note the digital lifeline tethered to Nancy's heart monitor had abruptly severed its connection. A few hours following that blackout, the 84-year-old mother of Savannah Guthrie simply vanished. Zero arrests, zero explanations. We are left only with a disguised intruder, crimson stains, dead-end extortion attempts, and now a phantom vehicle slipping through the blackness at the worst possible moment. This is the genesis of our chilling narrative. It begins not with a confession, but with an agonizing inquiry that grows more suffocating over time. Could that shadowy sedan be the transport used to steal Nancy Guthrie away under the cover of night? Law enforcement formally acknowledge they are scrutinizing surveillance footage of a motorized transport, yet remain stubbornly tight-lipped regarding its identity. That oppressive silence birthed a profound enigma. If this automobile holds the key, every agonizing tick of the timeline carries monumental weight. Who gripped that steering wheel? Was it a nameless phantom gliding through Tucson before dawn? Or did the driver possess intimate familiarity with those desolate avenues? A perpetrator who mapped visual dead zones, understanding precisely how to evaporate without raising suspicion? Why does this chilling investigation continually drag the same identities and unresolved paranoia back into the spotlight, even as detectives refuse to declare a prime suspect? Tonight, we relentlessly track that phantom transport, dissecting its chosen path, the razor-thin timing, and the unblinking camera. We probe the haunting void between Nancy's final secure moments and the sudden materialization of that machine. If connected, this fleeting footage transcends a mere digital blur. It could be the dynamic puzzle piece explaining how an elderly woman was erased from her sanctuary, birthing one of the most macabre mysteries currently gripping the nation. Witnessing these chronological fragments locked together with chilling precision, you will inevitably succumb to the identical doubt tormenting everyone else. Was that merely an innocent commuter, or the exact metallic coffin that spirited Nancy Guthrie into the unknown? This elusive vehicle bleeds into our investigation the way devastating clues often do, stealthily, almost as an afterthought, before suddenly dominating the narrative. It is decidedly not the initial mental snapshot that flashes when Nancy Guthrie is uttered. The primary visual remains the disguised intruder lingering ominously, forever frozen in the nocturnal security feed. That frame is visceral, radiating pure terror. However, the mystery surrounding the passing automobile is an entirely different beast. This vehicle is paramount because it might narrate the aftermath, what transpired beyond the door, after a mundane evening metastasized into calculated brutality. As law enforcement pushed forward, they corroborated they were heavily scrutinizing video of a lone vehicle. It was immortalized on a street bordering Nancy's subdivision, rolling past mere moments after the most pivotal juncture. To grasp this gravity, rewind to the established sequence. Nancy Guthrie, aged 84, was last seen January 31st, shortly after loved ones delivered her to her tranquil Tucson area residence. During the pre-dawn darkness of February 1st, an obscured figure was electronically documented, manipulating the video doorbell mounted outside her sanctuary. Roughly 30 minutes following that sinister sabotage, the medical software tethered to Nancy's internal pacemaker suffered a total communication failure. Missing Sunday service? Frantic relatives sounded the alarm. Forensics would later verify the alarming crimson smears across her patio belonged unmistakably to the matriarch. That grim, linear progression serves as the bare-bones framework of the publicly reported atrocity. An innocent drop-off, a disguised predator, a severed cardiac lifeline, and then complete erasure. Now, inject the specter of that passing vehicle into this suffocating sequence. Drawing from journalistic accounts anchored by civilian security footage, an automobile was recorded gliding past a nearby residence. It traveled a probable escape vector at approximately 2:36 in the morning. This timestamp is utterly paramount, falling mere minutes after the cardiac monitor went dead. The sheriff stated unequivocally, His detectives were meticulously dissecting the captured visuals. He emphasized the vehicle was a vital component of the active dragnet, while enforcing a strict veil of secrecy, refusing to divulge its sinister role. Such deliberate ambiguity plunges the public into an agonizing state of suspended dread. This phantom automobile might be the tragedy's linchpin, or a tangential footnote. Regardless, authorities treat it as a lead far too dangerous to overlook. Furthermore, the specific geographic trajectory where the machine was sighted imbues the recording with an overwhelmingly sinister significance. Major publications revealed this digital evidence originated approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's doorstep, situated directly along a prime exfiltration route. The local security lens captured a sparse flow of nocturnal traffic, with this one hauntingly specific car manifesting at the exact 2:36 in the morning milestone. In an investigation where every ticking second holds power, that level of chronological synchronicity is the exact nightmare fuel, forcing onlookers to endlessly re-examine the timeline. It loops inside their heads. Should this shadowy transport bear zero connection to Nancy, it stands merely as an astronomically unfortunate twist of timing. But if intrinsically linked to that night's horrors, this pixelated flash represents perhaps the most terrifyingly direct visual evidence of a fleeing predator investigators possess. This is precisely why the element of the vehicle has evolved into such a commanding focal point in the investigation. While the footage of the masked figure confirms a menacing presence at the victim's doorstep, the grim discovery of blood dictates that a brutal encounter unfolded just inches from her threshold. The automobile, however, introduces an entirely distinct set of questions, shifting the psychological focus from who arrived in the dead of night to the exact mechanics of their escape. Suddenly, a static scene of localized terror accelerates into a mobile timeline, fundamentally altering the shape of the mystery the second you factor in velocity, trajectory, and the calculated route of a getaway. The narrative morphs from a mere breach of sanctuary to a calculated extraction, pivoting from the initial violent confrontation to the chilling logistics of carrying someone away. Given that we are dealing with a senior citizen who lacked the physical capacity to simply evaporate into thin air, the puzzle of vehicular transport becomes an inescapable reality for detectives. The true horror of this automotive clue lies in its initial, deceptive mundanity when first reviewing the digital recordings. You will not find the frantic adrenaline of a high-speed pursuit, the blinding glare of law enforcement sirens, or a conveniently crystal-clear freeze frame of a license plate. Instead, it is merely a solitary shadow slipping down a quiet suburban street under the cover of darkness, blending in with a sparse handful of nocturnal wanderers logged during those witching hours. Yet, this is the cold reality of authentic homicide investigations, where the most damning pieces of evidence rarely scream for attention. Rather, they whisper. A single automobile, a solitary thoroughfare, and an isolated digital timestamp intersecting in a void of blackness, a fleeting moment where slumbering neighbors remained blissfully unaware that a fragment of a nationwide tragedy was rolling past their bedroom windows. In this dark puzzle, chronology is absolute king, with digital logs from the network router indicating that the victim's heart monitor went dead roughly 30 minutes after the disguised intruder was caught blinding the security lens. Then, at approximately 2:36 in the morning, a private doorbell surveillance system on an adjacent street silently captures a passing motor vehicle. Even if we strictly adhere to the publicly verified facts without venturing into wild speculation, the urgent desperation of law enforcement to secure and analyze that specific video clip becomes glaringly obvious. Within a chronological framework starved for concrete anchor points, a motorized transport traversing the area mere minutes after the lethal window of opportunity cannot be dismissed as mere environmental static. It is a profound investigative thread, the precise caliber of clue capable of either blowing the entire mystery wide open or permanently sealing off a dead-end avenue. However, the presence of the automobile serves another, far colder purpose. It forces both the public and professionals to dissect the atrocity through a lens of ruthless pragmatism. Assuming the victim was forcibly taken against her will, the perpetrator was faced with the immediate, heavy burden of physically relocating her from the premises. This dictates physical exertion, the ticking clock of exposure, and a literal path dragged from the entryway or the concrete drive toward a waiting mechanical getaway. It ultimately means the architect of this nightmare was forced to calculate their exit strategy with the exact same chilling precision as their initial home invasion. Armchair detectives and casual observers naturally fixate their attention on the disguised prowler, simply because the visual is so viscerally terrifying and readily available. Yet, the specter of the getaway car redirects the mind toward cold logistics, and the mechanics of a crime can frequently unmask a killer just as effectively as a name or a face, as atrocities do not occur in a vacuum. They materialize in physical dimensions, carving through asphalt, gravel drives, and sleeping subdivisions, navigating the halo of street lamps with combusting engines and rotating tires, directed by a human hand making deliberate navigational choices. This deeply mechanical perspective is precisely the reason the perpetrator's chosen trajectory holds such immense, paralyzing weight. Early media dispatches characterizing the doorbell camera recording noted that the lens was trained on a street serving as a highly plausible escape corridor out of the victim's affluent enclave. The sheer gravity of the term plausible corridor cannot be overstated, heavily implying that detectives and reporters are not merely grabbing at geographical straws miles away from ground zero. Rather, they are scrutinizing a highly logical, tactically sound trajectory for a fugitive slipping away from the crime scene during the darkest, most desolate hours before dawn. It is right at this intersection of geography and intent that the narrative descends into an even deeper shade of black. The moment you contextualize that solitary vehicle as a deliberate instrument of escape, a chilling psychological profile begins to form, begging the question of whether the phantom behind the steering wheel possessed an intimate mastery of the local terrain. Were they intimately aware of which side streets offered the deepest shadows, possessing the cunning required to glide out of a high-net-worth subdivision without triggering a single alarm or waking a single guard dog? Predictably, this is the exact juncture where internet-fueled speculation has aggressively outpaced verified forensic fact, with digital sleuths desperately hoping this single phantom vehicle will crack the entire mystery wide open. The masses yearn for this metallic clue to seamlessly weave together the chronology, the geography, the crime scene, and the sprawling web of suspects into one neat, cinematic bow. Yet authorities have steadfastly refused to draw those lines in the public square. The presiding sheriff has offered only a measured, sterile confirmation that the vehicular video evidence is currently undergoing rigorous forensic review. Major news outlets have further corroborated that detectives consider the digital capture an active component of the dossier, though they have been incredibly careful to emphasize that its ultimate evidentiary value remains shrouded in doubt. This subtle linguistic boundary is paramount. The automobile is undoubtedly suspicious enough to warrant intense scrutiny, but it is a far cry from being officially branded as the confirmed chariot of the abductor. Within a labyrinthine investigation already littered with the ghosts of dead-end clues and shattered hopes, such disciplined restraint from law enforcement is absolutely vital. The armchair detective community absorbed this brutal lesson during the saga of the discarded hand covering, a fabric remnant discovered near the perimeter that initially masqueraded as the holy grail of physical evidence. To the untrained eye, it bore an uncanny, almost cinematic resemblance to the protective gear donned by the faceless phantom captured on the porch monitor. That illusion shattered once the crime lab sequenced the genetic material, prompting the sheriff to announce the item merely belonged to an innocent food service employee utterly detached from the vanishing. In a heartbeat, a supposedly airtight breakthrough disintegrated into nothing more than worthless, contaminated debris. This pattern of heartbreak is the precise reason any discussion of the mysterious automobile must be navigated with extreme narrative caution. It possesses the potential to be a monumental keystone. Yet, until the detectives running the war room decide to break their silence, this rolling shadow exists strictly in the realm of chilling theory rather than undeniable fact. Nevertheless, even when stripped of absolute certainty, the presence of the vehicle injects a vital, desperately needed element into the stagnant investigation: kinetic momentum. Until now, the grim narrative has been paralyzed, anchored entirely to the footprint of the victim's residence, the unblinking digital eye, the blood-stained entryway, and the heartbreaking shrine assembled beyond the iron gates. The specter of the fleeing machine shatters that claustrophobia, forcefully projecting the mystery out into the wider world while asking the ultimate chilling question of what occurred in the aftermath, and whether a predator simply glided away into the night with terrifying, ice-cold deliberation. Did the perpetrator linger in the shadows following the snatching before that automobile finally emerged from the dark? Did a solitary figure grip the steering wheel? Or was another presence concealed within the cabin? Had Nancy already been forced into that very automobile? Or are we merely looking at a phantom, a random passerby, completely unlinked to this sinister puzzle? Official records remain frustratingly silent on these points, yet they are precisely the inquiries that matter most, echoing the exact paths detectives are quietly pursuing behind closed doors. Then there is the chilling weight of that digital footprint. 2:36 in the morning. On the surface, it sounds like such a mundane moment in time. However, within a nightmare like this one, a single chronological marker acts as a terrifying portal, offering a fleeting glimpse into absolute blackness. One can practically sense the heavy, suffocating quiet blanketing the streets during that dead hour. The vast majority were lost in slumber, completely oblivious, leaving no vigilant witnesses on the sidewalks to document passing headlights. Not a single soul could have fathomed that a solitary automobile drifting past a roadside lens would eventually be burned into the collective memory of the entire nation. Nevertheless, the moment the narrative broke open and the raw video was unearthed, those specific minutes forever shed their innocence. They morphed into the central enigma, casting a long shadow over the entire manhunt, exactly what was prowling the streets of Tucson right after Nancy's final digital heartbeat faded into nothingness. This automobile carries profound significance as well, offering observers a tangible, mechanical ghost to track, shifting focus away from a mere faceless phantom hidden behind a disguise. A covered visage expertly conceals a perpetrator's humanity. A motorized machine inevitably leaks different, critical secrets. Its silhouette, its dimensions, its chosen trajectory, its speed, and even the psychological arrogance betrayed by how smoothly it navigated the asphalt. Law enforcement has stubbornly withheld any concrete, granular breakdown of the automobile captured on that lens. Press dispatches have painted it in only the vaguest strokes, with officials refusing to officially verify either the brand or the specific edition. This agonizing lack of clarity is maddening for those watching from the outside, yet it heavily implies a grim reality about the evidence. The visual recording is likely flawed. Should the capture be severely pixelated or shot from a compromised vantage point, detectives are likely leaning heavily on chronologies and street mappings rather than a crisp, undeniable license plate read. Such a scenario perfectly clarifies how an automobile could be the linchpin of the entire inquiry without instantly triggering a widely broadcast arrest. Equally vital to the anatomy of this case is the actual origin point of that haunting digital tape. Based on chronicles from the Associated Press, the initial sweep for security visuals conducted by the sheriff spanned a strict 2-mile boundary encircling Nancy Guthrie's community as agents scoured the area for any shady figures or transports haunting the streets during the 30 days prior to her vanishing. Intriguingly, the private residents who ultimately discovered and surrendered the critical doorbell camera tape resided well past that designated perimeter, only bringing it to light after catching wind of the tragedy through television broadcasts. This particular caveat possesses a subtle but devastating implication. It confirms that highly crucial visual evidence slipped through the initial dragnet simply because the authorities originally cast far too narrow of a net. Ultimately, it fell upon everyday citizens, independently scouring their personal archives to forcefully expand the geographic scope of the hunt. Within the trenches of authentic criminal inquiries, this breed of grassroots sleuthing often proves to be the definitive turning point. However, this breakthrough forces a rather disturbing query. If a single, incredibly potent clip materialized from beyond the primary zone, how many other unexamined lenses are still out there, silently recording the avenues just outside that initial border? What number of properties, wrought iron entrances, paved approaches, and hidden alleys secretly harbor fragmented glimpses of the perpetrator's getaway path? The command center is acutely aware of this glaring blind spot, which remains a primary driver behind their relentless, desperate pleas for civilian uploads and anonymous whispers. An automobile gliding through the dead of night inadvertently creates numerous windows for exposure. It slips by an initial lens, then a secondary one, and perhaps a third. The true agonizing hurdle lies not merely in harvesting these disjointed frames, but in stitching them together and deciphering if they form a cohesive, terrifying narrative or simply a chaotic collage of unconnected midnight travelers. Furthermore, within the chilling saga of Nancy Guthrie, every freshly unearthed breadcrumb has been fiercely stalked by a relentless storm of societal theorizing. Certain factions of cyber sleuths have desperately attempted to forcibly tether the vehicle imagery to specific individuals already swirling within the chaotic vortex of web-based conjecture. Two identities frequently dragged into the spotlight are Tommmaso Cioni and Dominic Evans. However, official channels have rigorously refrained from formally designating either figure as a targeted perpetrator in direct relation to the automobile's visual capture. Truthfully, wider journalistic deep dives have consistently underscored that this chilling puzzle remains entirely unsolved, devoid of any formal apprehensions, proving that digital witch hunts have frequently sprinted dangerously far ahead of cold, undeniable forensics. Drawing that hard line between fact and fiction is absolutely paramount when constructing an investigative retrospective of this nature. The spectral automobile must be dissected as a vital thread. Yet we must meticulously avoid the illusion that society has already been handed the true identity of its ghostly pilot. What can be stated with absolute certainty and ethical clarity is the following. The captured footage of that machine deepens the chilling abyss of this enigma, rather than providing any semblance of closure. It ominously implies that the kidnapping utilized a specific, calculated escape vector from the victim's community, a trajectory that forensic analysts are currently tearing apart. This digital artifact assigns a definitive stopwatch to the presumed getaway phase of the atrocity. Furthermore, it carves out an entirely fresh vantage point for deciphering the offender's logistical foresight and the chilling choreography of their post-snatching escape. Moreover, since the chief of police has deliberately refused to rule out the involvement of a coordinated faction over a lone wolf, the mere presence of this transport naturally pours gasoline on the fires of conjecture. It forces the mind to agonizingly weigh whether this nightmare was the masterwork of a singular phantom or a meticulously orchestrated pack. To reiterate, this does not offer concrete proof of a syndicate, yet it renders the logistical puzzle of their midnight transit utterly impossible to brush aside. There exists a profound narrative reality embedded here, one that flawlessly mirrors the forensic reality of the manhunt. In the dark realm of homicides and disappearances, the front threshold is the birthplace of terror, yet the asphalt highway is where the enigma violently breeds. Confined within the walls of a residence or isolated upon the front steps, an atrocity feels suffocatingly personal and dreadfully instantaneous. Once the horror spills onto the pavement, it transforms into a cold, calculated chess match. The chosen compass point holds weight, the mileage covered speaks volumes, and the ultimate drop zone is everything. Should that fleeting glimpse of the machine at 2:36 in the morning be genuinely tied to the nightmare, then buried somewhere just out of the camera's reach lies a vastly darker, yet to be discovered chapter of this twisted saga. The public remains entirely blind to its next move, whether it veered off or idled to a stop. Did anyone along that route witness an anomaly before realizing they were witnessing a crime? This is why detectives relentlessly canvass the neighbors. They hunt fringe details, probing unexplained digital blackouts and murmurs of unsettling prowlers spotted just prior to the disappearance. This reveals a chilling reality. Authorities no longer view this tragedy as a spontaneous, isolated flash of violence. Instead, they are pursuing darker inquiries of calculated premeditation, a silent approach, and a clean escape. The car slots seamlessly into this terrifying puzzle. A masked intruder doesn't merely materialize on a porch and then vaporize. If Nancy was forcibly moved, a reliable transportation method becomes the absolute linchpin. The burning question is whether that getaway vessel was the sedan captured on surveillance or an unknown phantom machine. Perhaps this explains why the grainy clip strikes a nerve. It is the first tangible thread leading away from the doorstep into the broader geography. The footage forces us to conjure not just the violent horror inside, but the sickening silence that followed. An isolated blacktop winding through the foothills, practically devoid of overnight traffic. A lone set of headlights sweeps past a lens. Somewhere outside that digital frame lies an 84-year-old grandmother. Her desperate family remains blinded to what transpired once darkness consumed her home. This agonizing mystery must stay in our sights. The ultimate enigma isn't just who lurked at Nancy Guthrie's threshold, but what slipped out of the neighborhood afterward. Ultimately, that fleeting sedan could amount to a frustrating dead end or unlock the entire nightmare. Until authorities break their silence, the vehicle lingers within the timeline like a restless, mechanical ghost. Deceivingly mundane, yet carrying the crushing possibility that it rolled through Tucson, concealing the truth everyone is desperate to unearth. As the horrors unfold, the car has morphed from a side clue into a secondary specter, stalking closely behind the original threat. The primary phantom is the masked figure on the doorstep. The secondary terror is this anonymous machine gliding down a dark, adjacent road minutes later. Detectives openly concede they are meticulously dissecting every pixel of that tape as a vital puzzle piece. Furthermore, Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed his unit is wrestling with a terrifying unknown, whether they are hunting a lone wolf or a coordinated pack. This distinction is paramount. The vehicle does not merely hint at a rapid escape strategy. It introduces a chilling element of organized conspiracy. Was the intruder his own wheelman, or did an accomplice wait nearby? Here is where the psychological dread deepens. A disguised assailant forcing entry speaks of sudden, intimate violence. Conversely, an extraction vehicle on an escape route points to a calculated relocation, a horrific second act. Merge these two terrifying concepts, and the conspiracy widens. The public is no longer fixated on a single snapshot of terror. We now face a deadly choreography, an intruder breaching the perimeter, a sickening timeline gap, and a quiet exodus in the early morning. Even without straying from established facts, this methodical progression explains exactly why the automobile took center stage. It stands as the inaugural clue, shifting our gaze from the crime scene, directing us toward the unimaginable aftermath. A major reason this recording has captivated the public psyche is that it forces an incredibly fundamental, utterly terrifying inquiry. If Nancy was taken against her will, how was she transported? Authorities treat this strictly as an abduction, knowing Nancy was 84. Detectives entertain no fantasies here. This was never a scenario where an elderly woman simply chose to leave and vanish. Therefore, transport logistics are everything. Whether the sedan in the clip becomes the smoking gun or a red herring, the truth remains inescapable. The perpetrator had to flee that house. And if Nancy was in their clutches, they needed a covert way to move her too. It is the sinister precision of the timeline that constantly yanks our focus back to that quiet road. A Reuters timeline pinpoints the exact moment her pacemaker application flatlined a digital death knell just after the masked phantom disabled her doorbell camera. Independent reports subsequently logged the mystery car at roughly 2:36 in the morning minutes later, cruising an artery considered a viable escape route. In an investigation starved of verifiable landmarks, such tight chronological alignment is downright chilling. It does not prove Nancy was in that car, but it justifies the obsessive forensic scrutiny, explaining why onlookers obsessively replay that chronological loop. Then, there is the brooding character of the escape route itself. The vigilant locals who unearthed the surveillance clip were not monitoring a bustling interstate choked with endless overnight traffic. Records show their lens captured a mere handful of vehicles over several hours, making the 2:36 in the morning sighting remarkably prominent. Simply put, the environment was so remarkably dead that a single passing vehicle at the exact right moment morphs into a clue of colossal magnitude. Presence alone doesn't dictate guilt, but it screams for attention. In twisted investigations, noticeable anomalies are often the first bloody footprint toward truth. Certain corners of the public sphere have pushed boundaries even further, obsessively attempting to unmask the true identity of the phantom machine. According to Fox News, former New York Police Department investigator Pat Brosnan and his analytical team strongly suspected the phantom vehicle bore the distinct silhouette of a Kia Soul. They drew this chilling conclusion from the grainy shadows captured on surveillance, specifically noting the stark geometry of the roof and the shape of the rear quarter windows. Yet, we must tread carefully. This remains the educated guess of a third party, entirely separate from any official declaration by the detectives working the actual case. The authorities have remained tight-lipped, refusing to officially name the make or model, a silence that speaks volumes when the public is starving for just one definitive clue. In the echo chamber of an unsolved mystery, a compelling theory can all too easily morph into accepted truth long before the evidence backs it up. However, this very ambiguity whispers a profound secret about the investigation. The fact that law enforcement refuses to publicly commit to a vehicle description strongly suggests that the recovered video simply lacks the resolution to stand as definitive proof on its own. Consequently, detectives are likely forced to weave together a complex web of timestamps, potential escape paths, and overlapping camera angles, rather than relying on a single smoking gun. If this holds true, the true significance of the automobile lies not in its physical appearance. Instead, its power stems from how perfectly its movements synchronize with the classified puzzle pieces safely locked inside police files. A fleeting shadow on a single lens turns into a devastating piece of evidence if it was tracked by neighboring lenses, or if cellular data pinpoints an identical machine stalking the perimeter when the clock ran out. This psychological reality is exactly why the desperate plea for civilian security recordings carries such immense weight. The Associated Press revealed that detectives urged anyone living near Nancy to scour their home security archives, and they were not just looking at the dark hours surrounding her vanishing. They demanded tape from an entire month prior, a sweeping net that proves investigators were hunting for something far more sinister than a spontaneous crime. They were searching for a predator's rhythm, hunting for traces of a watcher lingering outside her home long before the trap was sprung. They needed to know if an unknown machine had been slowly, quietly patrolling the street on multiple occasions. They were probing to see if this nightmare was a meticulously orchestrated kidnapping rather than a horrific crime of opportunity. If that car cruising by at 2:36 in the morning played a role, it almost certainly did not materialize from thin air. When you truly let that sink in, the presence of that phantom car takes on an incredibly sinister aura. If the driver was the architect of her fate that evening, they were likely laying the groundwork in the shadows days, or perhaps weeks, in advance. It could have easily glided through the neighborhood during daylight, masquerading as routine traffic, or idled in a blind spot where suburban eyes simply look away. Perhaps it navigated the quiet foothills with such ease that it became part of the scenery. Among the manicured lawns of an affluent community, the mundane is the perfect disguise for a predator. An automobile that fits the local aesthetic or mimicry thereof slips past the watchful eyes that would normally lock on to something foreign and threatening. This psychological blind spot is precisely why mobile abductions are notoriously difficult to decipher during the critical early hours of an investigation. Thousands of steel boxes blend together on the asphalt, right up until the chilling moment one is unmasked as a crime scene. But the darkness goes even deeper. Sheriff Nanos has chosen his public statements with surgical precision, deliberately utilizing language that opens the door to a terrifying prospect, a coordinated attack. By openly declaring that his team is closing in on the person or people responsible, he stops short of confirming a conspiracy while refusing to let the theory of multiple perpetrators die. When you juxtapose the terrifying image of a masked intruder on the porch with an unidentified vehicle ghosting along a potential escape route, the chilling notion of a division of labor becomes nearly impossible to ignore. The horrifying math suggests a partnered strike, the muscle breaching the threshold, and the wheelman waiting in the dark. One executing the violent abduction, the other securing the immediate vanishing act. While this remains a chilling hypothesis rather than sworn testimony, it is a narrative practically demanded by the breadcrumbs left behind. This intersection of shadows and steel is exactly where the mystery collides with the chaotic swirl of identities dominating internet sleuth forums. The title of this film deliberately confronts the looming specters of Tommmaso Cioni and Dominic Evans figures, who have been mercilessly dragged into the spotlight of public rumor, yet we must navigate these waters with absolute, cold precision. At this very second, the authorities have flatly refused to officially tie either individual to the crime. Neither man has been labeled as the ghost behind the wheel captured by that haunting doorbell lens. Dominic Evans has vehemently and openly rejected any connection to the nightmare, while seasoned journalists continuously caution that the digital witch hunt has wildly outpaced the actual forensics. Therefore, when the restless public demands to know if the headlights illuminate one suspect over another, the cold, hard truth is that we are all still fumbling in the dark. Yet, the paranoia refuses to fade. The existence of that machine fundamentally mutates the anatomy of the crime. If the faceless intruder were the sole anomaly, the entire investigation would remain paralyzed at the front door. The addition of the automobile injects a far more complex psychological profile into the mix, one defined by calculated trajectory, deliberate concealment, and the cold logic of an escape plan. The moment a getaway map becomes part of the equation, the mind immediately spirals into questioning who possessed the intimate, local knowledge required to pull it off. Who possessed the nerve and the familiarity to navigate those winding, pitch-black streets long before the break of dawn? Was the pilot a mere ghost drifting through the night, or did they possess a deeply rooted, sinister purpose for being on that specific street? It is this deeply unsettling question that makes the automotive clue so impossible to ignore. It acts as the terrifying umbilical cord connecting the shattered sanctuary of the home to whatever unimaginable horror awaited at the end of the line. Analyzing the getaway path is an exercise in pure psychological torment, spawning a hydra of terrifying theories without offering a single drop of closure. A machine slipping out of that enclave in the dead of night possessed the horrifying freedom to vanish in any direction, potentially plunging straight into the concrete labyrinth of Tucson. Alternatively, it might have crept out toward the desolate, whispering fringes of the desert, deliberately tracing a path selected not for a quick getaway, but for maximum isolation and absolute darkness. While the general public remains in the dark about which exact route investigators deem the most critical, the sheer level of interest authorities have placed on this surveillance footage proves that the suspect's direction of travel is everything. A road is never just a path. It is a conscious choice. Whoever is behind the wheel is not merely moving through the night, they are making calculated, irreversible decisions. In a complex and chilling crime of this nature, the choices made on the asphalt can unmask a perpetrator just as effectively as the sinister choices made right at the victim's front door. The crucial role that nearby residents played in bringing this hidden footage to light is another fascinating layer of the puzzle that simply cannot be overlooked. According to various reports, these neighbors stepped forward independently after watching the evening news broadcasts, rather than being prompted by an initial police canvass of their specific street. This implies that everyday citizens, quietly scrolling through their own private security recordings, might have profoundly expanded the geographical footprint of this entire investigation. Put simply, the community did not just sit back and consume the terrifying details of this mystery. They actively helped to mold the direction of the manhunt. This dynamic is incredibly important because it hints that the ultimate breakthrough in this case might just stem from an infinitesimally small detail, something that appeared utterly meaningless until it was snapped into the correct timeline. It could be a solitary car rolling down a dark road, an unfamiliar vehicle parked innocuously days prior, or perhaps a shadow slowly making repeated passes through a quiet suburban neighborhood. Just one sudden flash of memory, one recovered fragment of the night, possesses the power to completely alter the scope and scale of a massive criminal investigation. Perhaps this is precisely why the grainy vehicle footage feels so overwhelmingly potent, even within a dark narrative that is already densely packed with far more visceral pieces of physical evidence. The discovery of blood stained across the front porch is undeniably more dramatic. The spectral image of a masked intruder is certainly more terrifying to look at. The chilling ransom communications elicit a much deeper emotional response, yet the fleeting image of that car is entirely strategic. It forces us to ask how this horrific crime actually operated within the physical world. It demands to know whether the phantom standing at that doorway arrived fully prepared, not merely to intimidate a victim, but to extract them entirely and vanish into the blackness. That critical shift rips the investigation straight out of the paralyzing realm of initial shock, dragging it directly into the cold, calculated realm of criminal logistics. As any seasoned detective will attest, in the most severe of investigations, logistical evidence is exactly where blind panic peels away to reveal cold, methodical planning. we must also confront the stark reality that this case has already demonstrated how dangerously deceptive first impressions can be. The mysterious glove that initially seemed like the ultimate smoking gun ultimately amounted to absolutely nothing. Other elements of the timeline, such as the agonizingly delayed retrieval of doorbell camera files from remote back-end servers, proved to be vastly more complicated on a technical level than anyone initially anticipated. Therefore, when analyzing the footage of this unknown vehicle, exercising intense caution is not a sign of investigative weakness. It is the hallmark of strict procedural discipline. The reality that law enforcement officials are still meticulously scrutinizing this footage rather than hastily declaring the mystery solved strongly suggests they are desperately avoiding a classic trap, allowing the loudest, most obvious clue to lead them down a blind alley. What remains absolutely undeniable in the face of all this uncertainty is one chilling fact. The presence of that car exponentially deepens the terrifying mystery. It forces everyone observing the case to stop viewing the crime as a single, isolated, and frozen moment of terror on a front porch, and instead see it as a malicious chain of actions stretching far beyond the property line. It quietly whispers that this abduction, if indeed that specific vehicle was the method of transport, was executed with a pre-planned, carefully mapped exit route in mind. It immediately opens the sinister door to the very real possibility of dark coordination between multiple individuals working in the shadows. Consequently, it firmly plants one of the most profoundly haunting images of this entire ordeal far away from the blood-stained concrete of Nancy's front door. Instead, that image belongs to a desolate nearby road, where an unknown vehicle glided silently through the suffocating darkness while nearly everyone else in the city of Tucson was fast asleep. As we plunge even further into the psychological depths of this story, hold tightly to that fleeting image. Do not cling to it because it provides all the answers, because it certainly does not. Hold on to it because it might just be the singular piece of the puzzle that whispers exactly where we need to look next. The chilling footage of the masked figure fundamentally reveals who brought the nightmare directly to the house. The car, however, could be the key to understanding how that very nightmare bled out into the surrounding world. And until investigators break their silence, that phantom vehicle remains frozen in the timeline. It is completely ordinary in its physical appearance, yet utterly extraordinary when placed into this grim context, becoming entirely impossible to forget once you comprehend just how intimately close it passed to the exact second Nancy Guthrie vanished from the face of the earth. What elevates the presence of this car to such a haunting level is not merely the terrifying possibility that it was waiting in the shadows. It is the deeply unsettling fact that it might have been idling there at the precise fraction of a second when this horrific event mutated from a violent home invasion into a complex transport mystery. A featureless, masked intruder looming silently at a front door is more than terrifying enough to freeze the blood. But the discovery of a vehicle slipping along a potential escape route just minutes after Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker application mysteriously severed contact injects a far darker reality into the narrative. The crime absolutely did not end on that concrete porch. The horror continued to move, bleeding out into the dead of night. Law enforcement has openly integrated the painstaking examination of that vehicle footage into the core of their ongoing case. Adding to the psychological weight, Sheriff Chris Nanos has publicly stated that authorities are still heavily weighing the chilling possibility that more than one individual conspired to pull off this nightmare. That solitary admission drastically changes the entire emotional texture of the timeline. This is no longer just about dissecting a static, terrifying image captured at Nancy's front door. It transforms into a ruthless question of sequence. First, Nancy is safely inside her own home, settling in after a warm family dinner. Next, a masked phantom materializes in the pre-dawn darkness, deliberately disabling the security camera. Shortly after, the life-saving pacemaker application suddenly loses its vital connection. Finally, on a dark nearby street, a solitary vehicle is caught on tape at roughly 2:36 in the morning. Written out on a stark police report, these might seem like completely separate, isolated fragments of time. In the grueling theater of a real criminal investigation, however, these are precisely the fragmented moments that seasoned detectives will agonize over for weeks, desperately attempting to stitch them into a single, terrifying narrative of movement. Once your mind begins to process the timeline in that exact way, the car ceases to be just a blurry image on a screen. It morphs into a cold, hard question of physical mechanics. If Nancy was indeed taken against her will, how exactly was she transported? She was an 84-year-old woman. From the very first hour, authorities approached this nightmare strictly as an abduction, never once dismissing it as the simple case of a confused elder wandering off into the night. The grim discovery of fresh blood on the porch would later serve as a silent, violent confirmation that a brutal struggle had unfolded right at the threshold of her safe haven. Therefore, without making a single leap beyond the established physical evidence, the sinister logistics of transport immediately become one of the most central, practical mysteries anchoring this entire investigation. The perpetrator desperately needed an escape route from that property. More importantly, if Nancy was taken against her will, she required transportation of vessel to carry her into the unknown. This undeniable logistical reality is precisely why the recovered vehicular surveillance video has gripped the public imagination with such terrifying force. Criminal narratives often establish their initial terror at the threshold, yet it is upon the cold asphalt where the true enigma unfurls. A doorway merely grants an attacker access, whereas an automobile dictates their trajectory into the shadows. The footage forces a chilling psychological inquiry. Did the phantom who materialized on Nancy's porch map out his getaway long before his gloved hand ever reached for the doorknob? We are left to wonder if the escape path was meticulously pre-selected, or if a desperate operative was blindly navigating the dark, improvising as he fled the scene. These lingering uncertainties elevate the horror of the event, stripping away the comfort of a spontaneous tragedy and replacing it with the dread of a coldly orchestrated operation. Even though law enforcement has maintained a strict, impenetrable wall of silence regarding these specifics, their relentless scrutiny of the video makes one thing abundantly clear. The getaway street is just as critical to this puzzle as the blood-stained house. The grainy clip captured by a nearby resident only deepens the surrounding paranoia. Media coverage indicated that the mysterious automobile was spotted gliding down a sleepy, tree-lined suburban corridor, rather than blending into the chaotic blur of a major interstate where a lone taillight would simply vanish completely unnoticed. Official statements and subsequent inquiries revealed that only a handful of automobiles traversed that quiet thoroughfare during the dead of night, casting a harsh, glaring spotlight on the exact moment this particular machine appeared. Had the neighborhood cameras recorded an endless, chaotic stream of nocturnal traffic, that crucial sighting at 2:36 in the morning could easily have been written off as visual static. However, amidst the eerie stillness of an abandoned road, a solitary vehicle prowling at the precise hour of a disappearance becomes utterly impossible to ignore. Yet, immense restraint remains absolutely paramount. If the haunting tragedy of the Nancy Guthrie investigation has taught us anything, it is the deceptive nature of evidence, how a seemingly perfect puzzle piece can effortlessly masquerade as the ultimate truth. Consider the discarded glove discovered near the perimeter. Initially, it felt like a monumental investigative breakthrough, particularly since its dark fabric aligned seamlessly with the attire of the masked intruder. Yet, forensic profiling eventually tethered the DNA to an innocent bystander who was entirely removed from the nightmare. This frustrating dead end serves as a grim cautionary tale for detectives everywhere. An artifact can feel undeniably magnetic and central to the plot, yet fail to unlock the actual mystery. This shadowy automobile could ultimately unravel the entire criminal enterprise, or it might just as easily fade into irrelevance as a cruel coincidence. At this exact moment, the only logical perspective is to mirror the cautious, calculating skepticism of the lead detectives. The anomaly is compelling enough to dissect pixel by pixel, yet it lacks the official stamp, identifying it as the abduction transport. Despite this reality, armchair sleuths obsessively scrutinize the shadows, desperate to manifest a definitive answer. Independent analysts and digital observers have relentlessly theorized regarding the specific manufacturer and design of the phantom transport. National news broadcasts referenced former New York City police veteran Pat Brosnan, who asserted that his investigative cohort identified the silhouette as a Kia Soul, drawing upon distinct visual contours from the tape. Nevertheless, the active task force has deliberately refrained from endorsing this automotive classification. This distinction is exceptionally crucial. The moment a specific brand infiltrates the collective mindset, it solidifies into an unbreakable urban legend, entirely bypassing the need for official verification. Surrounded by a chaotic storm of internet rumors, maintaining strict factual discipline is not a flaw. It is a mandatory requirement for preserving the dark integrity of this true crime narrative. The presence of the vehicle also whispers a much darker, far more sinister narrative. The terrifying prospect of premeditated stalking and surveillance. Detectives have actively canvassed for neighborhood recordings, expanding their digital net far beyond the grim evening of the actual vanishing, demanding archival footage from the preceding days. Furthermore, they are deeply analyzing peculiar broadband outages and internet sabotage that plagued the vicinity during the lead-up to the attack. While these overlapping anomalies do not definitively confirm the automobile was prowling the streets beforehand, they clearly indicate a police department hunting for a pattern. They are probing the shadows for digital tampering, quiet observation, and calculated groundwork laid long before the violent strike. Viewed through this expanded psychological lens, a car navigating an exit vector transforms from a mere getaway machine into a critical node in a vast, terrifying web that authorities are desperately trying to untangle. This is precisely where the core premise of this investigative journey begins, to apply unbearable pressure to the known facts. The theory that this very machine carried Nancy Guthrie away into the darkness is deeply haunting because it perfectly fills the most terrifying void in the timeline. The grim reality is that a faceless predator breached her sanctuary, and moments later, she vanished into the abyss. We are certain that crimson stains mark the patio, yet a profound black hole exists between the violence at the doorstep and the aftermath, the exact method of her extraction. Should this elusive sedan prove to be involved, it ceases to be mere background dressing in a grainy security video. It emerges as the physical link, the steel bridge connecting a shattered crime scene to a chilling, unseen underworld that detectives are still fighting to expose. Consequently, this elusive set of wheels breathes fresh life into the most hotly debated psychological aspect of the case. Was this a lone wolf or a coordinated pack? Sheriff Nanos has meticulously crafted his public statements, utilizing syntax that accommodates both a solitary monster and a criminal syndicate. This linguistic ambiguity is monumental, as a getaway ride inherently implies a division of sinister labor. A brute battering the entryway, while an accomplice idles the engine in the shadows, paints a drastically different, highly organized picture compared to an isolated maniac, orchestrating the entire nightmare completely unaided. On the official record, such a synchronized partnership remains an unverified theory. Nevertheless, it is hardly a stretch of the imagination to correlate a disguised home invader with a strategically positioned transport waiting on the periphery, which is exactly why the task force keeps the chilling prospect of multiple conspirators firmly planted on the table. This specific ambiguity serves as a breeding ground for cyber sleuthing, twisting raw data into something far more volatile and hazardous for the investigation. The identities of Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans have been relentlessly dragged into the digital crosshairs by amateur detectives. Yet at this current moment in the timeline, to this day, law enforcement officials have refrained from officially naming either individual as the person steering the automobile captured on that suburban doorbell footage. Dominic Evans has vehemently rejected any connection to this chilling vanishing, while mainstream reporting has repeatedly underscored the sheer devastation inflicted when internet sleuths let their theories outpace hard, verified facts. We must maintain a strict boundary between fact and fiction. While the surveillance video of that automobile might be the most crucial thread detectives possess, the harsh reality remains that the civilian world has zero definitive proof regarding whose hands grip that steering wheel. Nevertheless, the existence of this mysterious vehicle inevitably drags those specific identities right back into the spotlight, driven by the undeniable logic that navigating such a path requires an intimate knowledge of the terrain. An operator deeply familiar with this pocket of the world would instinctively understand exactly which isolated streets to take to avoid detection. They would possess the chilling foresight required to slip silently through the shadowy foothills in those darkest hours just before dawn, effectively remaining a ghost. Focusing on the automobile naturally forces the mind to consider the importance of geographic fluency. A deep-seated comfort with the landscape that allows a predator to chart a course through the blackness without a second of hesitation. Yet, this is precisely the critical juncture where morbid fascination must be divorced from actual proof. Pondering the significance of the chosen escape path is entirely justified. Fabricating absolute certainty about the phantom who charted that course, however, crosses a dangerous line. What cannot be ignored, however, is the profound way this singular piece of machinery magnifies the psychological terror woven into the very fabric of this mystery. Absent the footage, the narrative of this tragedy remains suffocatingly confined to the four walls of Nancy's residence. The introduction of the automobile breathes a deeply unsettling mobility into the timeline. It suddenly rips the scope of the investigation wide open, bleeding out into a dark labyrinth of intersections, sleeping subdivisions, and unknown endpoints that the rest of us are entirely blind to. This single element shifts the entire psychological weight of the crime, evolving it from the terrifying question of who approached the threshold to the far more horrifying reality of what unfolded once they left it behind, a uniquely paralyzing brand of dread. It suggests a terrifying possibility that this sinister act sprawled across a far wider geography, required a significantly deeper level of premeditation, and perhaps slipped past infinitely more lenses and witnesses than anyone initially dared to imagine. Perhaps that underlying threat is exactly why the grainy capture of this sedan continues to exert such a visceral grip on the public consciousness, even in the absolute absence of an identified driver. While a disguise might successfully conceal a perpetrator's visage, a rolling machine serves an even more sinister purpose, effectively swallowing the ultimate location of their victim. In many respects, pondering the final stop on that grim journey is the most terrifying exercise of all, plunging us directly into the darkest, entirely unanswered abyss of this entire narrative. To what unseen location was Nancy transported once she was pulled from the presumed safety of her home? That lone piece of footage might eventually hold the key to cracking that enigma, or it could lead nowhere. As things stand today, however, it simply exists within the chronology of the night, a chilling, mobile void slipping quietly through the timeline. It is nothing more than a mechanical phantom slicing through the pitch blackness at the absolute worst possible hour, burdened by a horrifying implication that refuses to let go of anyone who has laid eyes on the recording. That precise point in the darkness is where our focus must shift, moving beyond the metal shell itself to interrogate the secrets the asphalt might yield. The moment a malicious act spills from the confines of a front porch onto the open pavement, the entire nature of the beast fundamentally mutates. Every single subsequent maneuver along that pavement becomes critically important. The chosen bearing, the topography of the escape, the deliberate navigation buried somewhere within those calculating decisions might just lie the most definitive blueprint we possess regarding the unseen moments immediately following Nancy Guthrie's vanishing. Consequently, this elusive automobile stands poised to eventually cement itself as the ultimate linchpin in the sprawling labyrinth of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. This significance is absolutely not derived from any confirmed public knowledge that she was trapped inside it. We have no such assurance. Nor does its importance stem from authorities formally unmasking the individual at the controls. Law enforcement remains steadfastly silent on that front. The machine is paramount because of its sinister synchronization, manifesting in the timeline just moments after the confirmed window of violence at Nancy's residence, and crucially, because detectives themselves have openly acknowledged their intense scrutiny of its path. Within a deeply convoluted puzzle starved for concrete anchors, the presence of an automobile tracing a potential exodus from the crime scene transcends mere background detail. It transforms into a vital, beating heart of the mystery. Yet, this is exactly the space where the utmost restraint and analytical discipline must be rigorously enforced. Digital armchair detectives have repeatedly attempted to weaponize this visual clue, utilizing it as an unwarranted fast track to a neat and tidy resolution. They have recklessly stitched it to specific individuals, clear-cut profiles, and elaborate conspiracies. However, the actual, verified public dossier offers absolutely no foundation for definitively naming the operator. Sheriff Chris Nanos has openly stated that his team is tightening the net, while deliberately maintaining an investigative posture that accommodates the involvement of a solitary actor or perhaps a coordinated group. Concurrently, journalistic accounts have documented that certain individuals have been unequivocally cleared of suspicion, with law enforcement officially treating the immediate relatives as grieving collateral damage rather than targets of an impending indictment. Therefore, when one posits the dramatic question was the very machine utilized to spirit Nancy Guthrie away that fateful evening, piloted by Tommmaso Cioni or Dominic Evans, the only genuine, responsible response at this moment in time is profoundly stark. The inquiry carries an undeniable psychological weight, yet the empirical data required to back it up remains completely sealed away from civilian eyes. Dominic Evans has forcefully disavowed any role in this sprawling nightmare, and the authorities leading the charge have yet to formally tether either of these men to the driver's seat of the phantom automobile captured on the surveillance feed. Honoring that boundary is paramount, as the integrity of any genuine investigation must remain fiercely anchored to tangible forensics, rather than sprinting recklessly ahead on the fuel of mere conjecture. The truths that society can definitively claim are far more stripped down, and in a remarkably unsettling way, infinitely more terrifying. Nancy Guthrie was secure within her own sanctuary. A disguised predator breached her threshold under the cover of night. The security feed was deliberately sabotaged, the digital pulse from her medical device abruptly flatlined, and the crimson stains discovered on the concrete stoop were ultimately scientifically matched to Nancy herself. Shortly following that violent sequence, an automobile materialized on a peripheral street, a fleeting apparition that detectives deemed critical enough to subject to intense, meticulous dissection. That precise choreography of horrors is exactly why the imagery of this moving machine continues to cast a long, dark shadow over the entire investigation. It represents the terrifying possibility of being the inaugural glimpse into the abyss that opened up just past her entryway. Should a concrete link to that sedan be established, the narrative violently shifts from a localized home invasion to a deeply calculated, stealthy migration across the sleeping streets of Tucson well before the break of dawn. It immediately morphs into a complex web of geographical choices, synchronized timelines, chilling premeditation, and a totally unknown final resting place. The focus relocates to that invisible, haunted corridor of asphalt, stretching from Nancy's last confirmed coordinates to the terrifying destination where the ultimate truth was buried. This is the precise reason this fleeting automotive ghost carries such monumental weight. It might lack the power to decipher every lingering riddle, but it possesses the chilling potential to illuminate the exact trajectory those devastating answers took as they vanished into the night. The case remains locked in a chilling limbo. Nancy has vanished, and detectives are left to chase shadows. A substantial bounty sits untouched, fueling a relentless hunt for the architects of this nightmare. There is no clean resolution here. Instead, a crushing psychological weight bears down on the fragmented clues and the agonizing timeline. It is a silent coercion aimed at whoever harbors the dark truth. Consequently, the narrative returns to the exact visual trapping everyone. An isolated stretch of asphalt, a phantom vehicle in the blackness, a desolate doorstep steeped in dread, and a singular, maddening mystery. Did that car merely drift through the desert night? Or was it the precise vessel that swallowed Nancy Guthrie into the abyss? As dawn breaks, we pull back the curtain on a deeply poignant phenomenon quietly unfolding across the unforgiving Arizona landscape. Crossing into the 13th bleak morning of the hunt for Savannah's mother, an organic outpouring of solidarity wraps the sprawling metropolis in desperate hope. Our national correspondent steps into the harsh light of Tucson, unraveling this emotional thread of the mystery. A somber greeting provides a brief mask of normalcy before plunging straight back into the nightmare. Pacing the shadowed Catalina foothills, a singular dread echoes. Neighbors grapple with the psychological toll of her vanishing in their own quiet ways. A profound paralysis has gripped the community. Driven to intervene against the unknown, that fear morphs into tangible displays of collective grief. Scattered across the sun-baked landscape, sudden bursts of vivid amber starkly punctuate the desolation. Trunks are bound in bright fabric, and floral tributes meticulously staged a silent plea directed toward a shattered household. paces from the empty residence. Neighbor Kurt Dooney adorned his perimeter with colorful bands, erecting a silent beacon for the missing woman's 3 children. He highlights the psychological imperative of standing guard alongside the victims, a defense mechanism against creeping terror. Inside a local boutique, the frantic commercial energy of an approaching romantic holiday masks a deeply sorrowful undercurrent. Amidst typical arrangements, golden hues are curated for a darker purpose, demanding a closer look at the symbolism hidden within these blooms. Symbolizing desperate optimism against absolute despair, the shop coordinates with neighborhood leaders to ensure a seamless flow of visual prayers. Even with the family home agonizingly vacant, tribute crafters find fleeting solace in offering something tangible to fill the void. The underlying motive is starkly human. If weaving petals can somehow penetrate the nightmare, the labor becomes a necessary survival ritual. In an era where empathy is largely reduced to digital ghosts on screens, this physical manifestation feels hauntingly visceral. Countless onlookers confess a gnawing urge to physically stand on that fault line and push back. One local admitted the disappearance morphed into a relentless psychological fixation, compelling them to offer a physical token of distress. Beyond the regional station's glass walls, the raw gravity of collective mourning is undeniable, amplified by the daughter's deep roots. 3 stark words scrawled on a public banner act as a magnet, pulling in wandering souls compelled to anchor their grief. Emotional boundaries blur as resident Lynn McCain tearfully explains how the community internally adopted the victims, cracking under the trauma. A profound psychological transference has taken hold, plunging an entire populace into the daughter's suffocating nightmare. Thus, inked pleas, fragile blooms, and tightly bound fabrics serve as desperate vessels attempting to funnel strength into a shattered child. They construct a silent barricade of empathy, erected to shield her siblings and the fractured bloodline. Yet, beneath the surface, these rituals are a coping mechanism for the participants, a desperate attempt to plug the psychological void of their insatiable hunger for truth. It circles back to one agonizing unknown. Where is Nancy? The dispatch ends there, punctuating the chilling silence. That suffocating paralysis is a contagion of helplessness, bleeding outward to infect the psyche of the entire nation. It is a raw instinct. Faced with the abyss, humanity desperately craves a physical way to strike back against the dark. Just steps from our vantage point, that creeping dread materialized into a hand-painted placard silently pleading for a vanished woman's salvation. That desperate mantra is not merely etched in ink. It is a haunting undercurrent woven into the hushed murmurs of every passing face. It acts as their psychological armor. Gazing at the fractured family reveals a desperate reliance on the collective will of an audience watching their nightmare. The final echoing sentiment is simple: pull her back from the darkness.